His hands are already moving when the dispatcher picks up. James Ryan is on the floor of the living room, performing chest compressions, counting out loud, telling the operator before she can ask that he is a doctor and he knows what he is doing. His voice is steady. His instructions are precise. He gives the address without hesitation. He gives his name without being asked. When the medics arrive and the questions begin, he is ready for all of them. He tells the first responder they had been watching television the night before, that she had sent him to bed, that he went upstairs around 10 or 11 and came back down the next morning and found her on the couch. He is crying.
So last night you went to bed and she stayed on the couch? What time was that?
It must have been 11, 12 o'clock at night. Did she work anywhere? She used to work with me, but she stopped working a long time ago because she couldn't work anymore. Because she's so sad for her brother-in-law and then her brother.
But every answer comes before the question is fully formed. And then, without any prompting at all, he names the drug. He tells the officer she used to take it from his office, that he had caught her before, injecting herself, that she had struggled for a while. According to body cam footage and court records from Montgomery County, the officers on scene accept all of it, every word, without hesitation. He is a doctor. He is grieving. He already has an explanation for everything. That is the part worth sitting with. This is the case of Dr. James Ryan and the mother who walked through that door 20 minutes later and refused to believe a single word he said. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching this from. We want to hear from you. From where James Ryan stood, everything made sense. He ran Evolution Oral Surgery on Observation Drive in Germantown, Maryland, a well-regarded practice in a well-regarded suburb, the kind of place where a man with 20 years of surgical experience and a wall of certifications moves without being questioned. He was the owner, the sole practitioner, the name on the door. Sarah Harris had walked into his practice in the summer of 2020 to have her wisdom teeth removed. She was 23 years old. She had just won the Miss Maryland Petite pageant. She spoke multiple languages. Her family described her as someone who dreamed of joining the Peace Corps, of doing something that mattered in the world. She had plans. She had direction. She was, by every measure, someone at the beginning of something. After the procedure, Ryan reached out. He told her he was looking for a surgical assistant. She took the job in October of 2020. By January 2021, they were in a relationship. By the summer of that year, she had moved into his rented townhouse on Godwit Street in Clarksburg. To Ryan, the shape of all this likely felt natural. He was her employer, her partner, the most experienced person in every room they shared together. A man who understood medicine, who understood risk, who understood better than almost anyone exactly what the human body could and could not withstand. That expertise is what makes what came next so hard to look away from. By September 2021, Sarah's mother had started noticing things: the weight loss, the long sleeves, even on warm days, the exhaustion that wouldn't lift. She had started asking questions. Ryan, for now, had answers for all of them. To James Ryan, he was helping. That is the frame worth holding on to, because everything that followed only makes sense if you understand that. From where he stood, he was the solution. He was the one with the training, the license, the 20 years of surgical experience. He was the one who knew what certain drugs could do to a body in distress and how quickly they could make the distress disappear. Sarah had begun confiding in him about her anxiety not long after they started dating in January 2021. She was struggling. The worry was constant. Sleep was difficult. Ryan had something for that. On February 11th, 2021, in the first month of their relationship, he sent her a message. He told her he could give her an injection, that the anxiety would be completely gone in 6 seconds, that it would work. Think about that for a moment. Not a referral, not a prescription. An injection, ready, offered in the first month. According to trial testimony, it started sporadically. Then, the pattern shifted. Each time he was the one who had access to the supply. He brought it from the practice. He administered it at home in their living room with none of the monitoring equipment or safety protocols that his own surgical training required. Here is where the chapter turns. In May 2021, Sarah began seeing a psychiatrist a Dr. Ryan himself had connected her with. That doctor diagnosed her with bipolar disorder type 2. He attempted to manage her anxiety and depression through legitimate medication. Sarah specifically requested the sedative class of drugs. He refused because she had already disclosed a prior history of substance use, and he considered it too dangerous to prescribe them. A trained medical professional with full knowledge of her background looked at the same situation Ryan was looking at and said no. Ryan kept saying yes. By September 2021, the people closest to Sarah had begun to notice the signs. She was losing weight. She was not eating. She wore long sleeves even when it was warm outside. She was tired in a way that no amount of rest seemed to reach. She was 24 years old, and the only person in her life with the medical knowledge to understand exactly what was happening was the man bringing it through the front door. January 25th, 2022 is a Tuesday. Ryan and Sarah have a vet appointment with their dog. Afterward, according to his own account to officers, she asks if they can stop by his office on the way home. He has paperwork to finish, and she wants to come along. They go. He works. She wanders through the space. Then they leave, order food, and go back to the house on Godwit Street. From his side of that evening, nothing is out of place. But prosecutors presented evidence that earlier that same day, Sarah had sent Ryan a text asking whether it was possible for him to bring ketamine home when he came. His reply was direct. Yes, he would bring some. He told her he loved her. That is the last documented exchange between them. According to court documents, Ryan told police he went to bed at 10:30 that night. He said Sarah was fine when he went upstairs. She stayed downstairs, as she often did. He went to sleep. He came back down the following morning around 6:45. Sarah was on the couch, slumped in the corner. He pulled her to the floor. He started chest compressions, the right rate, the right depth, exactly as his training required.
She's flat on her back. I'm doing chest compressions.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and count the chest compressions with you, okay? Let me know when you're ready.
I'm doing them already. I'm doing 100. I'm a doctor. I know how to do them.
I gotcha. I'm going to keep count with you, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
When investigators moved through the house, they found bottles of injectable medication, needles, syringes, and tourniquets. Officers noted the bottles were not the kind distributed through a pharmacy. They were the kind used in clinical settings, operating rooms, surgical suites. Ryan stood in that living room while they worked around him. He was crying. He was answering questions. He already knew before anyone asked which drug she had likely taken and where it had come from. The officers accepted all of it. Not one of them in that moment had the pharmaceutical background to understand what they were actually looking at. The medics leave. The medical examiner arrives, and James Ryan is still in the house. For close to 2 hours, he sits inside the Godwit Street townhouse while officers and investigators move through the rooms around him. He answers their questions in the same measured, sequential way he answered the 911 dispatcher's steady voice, correct details, a coherent account already fully assembled. He tells them about Sarah's history, about her mental health, about the struggles that, from his telling, had been building for a long time. At one point, he mentions the dog in the crate. That detail sits there in the recording, a man whose girlfriend has just been pronounced dead, telling officers, between questions about the circumstances of her death, that there is a puppy secured under the stairs. It is not suspicious on its own, but it is the detail of a person who is managing the room, not falling apart inside it. Then the front door opens. Tina Harris arrived at the scene approximately 20 minutes after Ryan's call came through. According to her own account, she went directly for him, hitting him, screaming at him, demanding to know what he had done to her daughter. Officers had to physically step between them. Ryan stood there and took it. When investigators finished, they seized some drug vials from the scene but left the house without securing it. Sarah Harris's manner of death was recorded as undetermined. Ryan was not arrested. The responding team accepted the account he had been carefully building since 6:45 that morning. He walked out of that house with his story intact while behind him, Tina Harris stood in a room where her daughter had just died, certain of what had happened and holding nothing she could prove. In the weeks after January 26th, James Ryan went back to work. He returned to the practice on observation drive. He saw patients. He ran the office. From where he stood, the morning at Godwit Street had resolved the way he needed it to. The officers had accepted his account. The manner of death had been recorded as undetermined, and no arrest had followed. The story had held. What he did not know was what was happening on the other side of that silence. Rachel Harris spent the days after her sister's death going through Sarah's laptop. She knew the password, she knew her sister well enough to figure it out. When she got in, she found what she was looking for. She read them all. Every message, every exchange, the full documented record of what had been happening inside that house, written out between two people, stretching back nearly a year. Rachel added them to the photographs she had already taken on her prior visits, the drug vials, the IV equipment, the clinical packaging, and compiled everything into a physical binder. 200 pages. In February 2022, she handed it to Montgomery County Police. The binder found its way to Detective Ian Iacoviello, a specialist in pharmaceutical crime, 33 years on the force, weeks from retirement. He came in alone on a Sunday. It was his birthday. He said there was nothing else going on, and he just wanted to look through it and see. What he saw changed everything.
She's actively asking for drugs. At no point does he say no.
But beyond the personal devastation in those pages, he noticed something the initial officers had missed, and the reason they had missed it mattered. To an officer without pharmaceutical training, it had looked like medication. That difference was exactly why Ryan's account had worked. He was a doctor, he had named the drug, he had pointed at a history, and the officers had no framework to question any of it. Iacoviello did, and once he had read that binder, the credibility Ryan had built that morning was gone. As far as James Ryan knew, the matter had resolved. He had given the officers his account. He had named the drug, identified the history, framed the loss. He had walked out of that house a free man. The death had been recorded as undetermined. No arrest had followed. From where he stood, the story had done what it needed to do. But the story had a problem. The drug bottles found in Sarah's purse were sitting too far from her body. These were fast-acting drugs, the kind that take hold within seconds of being administered. If Sarah had given them to herself, she would have lost consciousness almost immediately. There would have been no time to place the bottles away, no time to lie back down on the couch. It was not possible, and someone had cleaned up. Someone had arranged what investigators found at that scene. Ryan had given first responders his explanation for the prior episode too, the one from December 2021, the time he had performed CPR and brought her back. He had mentioned it that morning at the scene. He offered it as evidence of her pattern. Investigators found that Sarah herself had sent a message to her former boyfriend that same month, telling him she had survived a medical emergency and had needed CPR for 5 minutes. Ryan had framed that prior incident as her history. Iacoviello read it as his. Ryan had built his defense on a simple premise, that Sarah had a history, a diagnosis, and choices of her own, that he had gone to bed, that he had come downstairs, that what happened next was something she had done to herself. But the evidence assembling around him came from sources he had no control over, his own records, his own messages, his own certifications turned against him one by one. The autopsy results confirmed that Sarah died from the combined effects of ketamine, propofol, and diazepam. Expert testimony at trial established that, taken together, those 3 drugs in a home setting without monitoring equipment, without medical staff, without any of the safety infrastructure Ryan used as a matter of routine at his own practice, could cause profound sedation and were potentially fatal. Ryan had known that. He had spent 20 years knowing exactly that. Court records documented his board certifications, his DEA license, his ACLS qualification. They showed that at his own practice, when he administered sedative drugs to patients, he always required multiple surgical assistants to be present. That was not a preference, it was a safety requirement that he enforced professionally and then ignored completely at home. Then came the prescription records. Investigators reviewed Ryan's prescription logs as part of the case. Those logs showed he had prescribed diazepam directly to Sarah. This detail carried particular weight because Sarah's own psychiatrist, the Dr. Ryan, had connected her with. The specialist whose entire role was managing her mental health had specifically refused to prescribe her that class of drug. The psychiatrist had documented her history of substance use and considered that prescription too dangerous to fill. By October, she was asking whether they had ketamine at the house. By November, she was telling him how she felt and asking for supplies. By December, she was asking him to bring propofol home, and then December 20th. Ryan sent her a message. He told her he had just administered ketamine to her while she was asleep. He told her what to do if she woke up. No monitoring, no second person, no emergency equipment within reach. According to charging documents, even after the prior medical emergency that same month, the one Ryan himself had described to officers at the scene, he continued to provide the same drugs. The supply did not pause. It ran straight through to the night she died. Prosecutors later told the court they never argued Ryan intended to kill Sarah Harris. They never had to. The argument was simpler than that. He was a doctor who knew exactly what those drugs did, watched what they were doing to her over the course of a year, and kept bringing them home anyway. That was the case, and it was built almost entirely from his own hands. On the morning of Tuesday, March 22, 2022, James Ryan arrived at work. For nearly 2 months, that had been his routine. Sarah Harris had died on January 26th. Until his arrest, her death had been considered an accident. Ryan had returned to the practice on observation drive. He had opened the building each morning. He had seen patients in the chair, administered anesthetic, reviewed files, gone home. The story he had told that morning at Godwit Street had bought him all of that: the operating room, the schedule, the ordinary shape of professional life continuing undisturbed. It ran out on a Tuesday. Officers were waiting for him outside Evolution Oral Surgery as he came in. He was arrested on the spot. Ryan was charged with second-degree depraved heart murder, involuntary manslaughter, possession with intent to distribute, and multiple drug distribution counts. The combined charges carried a maximum exposure of 78 years. His response through legal counsel was the same framing he had used since the morning the officers first arrived at the house. He had not intended for Sarah to die. He had been trying to help her. Whatever he had provided had come from care, not recklessness. His attorney told the court he was not a danger to the community, that he had surrendered his DEA license, and that he should be released to seek treatment for his own struggles with addiction and mental health. The judge denied bond. Both the judge and prosecutors described Ryan in open court as a dangerous man. Tina Harris was in the courtroom when the ruling came through. She said 3 words: "Thank you, Jesus." Ryan maintained everything he had maintained from the beginning. He did not testify at trial. He never conceded intent. The argument his legal team carried into court rested entirely on the one question the prosecution could never definitively close: who had administered the final dose? That question had protected him on January 26th. He was counting on it to protect him again. James Ryan sat at the defense table in the circuit court for Montgomery County for nearly 2 weeks. There were no cameras in the courtroom, only audio. Outside, the case had already drawn significant attention. Inside, Ryan stayed quiet. He did not testify. The man who had been building and delivering his account since the morning the officers first arrived, who had named the drug, placed the blame, held the room together through 2 hours of questions, sat through 14 days of testimony, and said nothing under oath. Whatever he knew, whatever he believed, whatever version of events he had been carrying since January 26th, he chose not to offer it to the jury directly. The prosecution opened by telling the jury that Sarah Harris had gone from a radiant beauty queen to a skeleton in less than 6 months. The defense responded by describing Ryan as a flawed individual who had fallen in love, 2 imperfect people whose lives had become entangled, and told the jury there was not murder in his heart. Tina Harris took the stand as the prosecution's first witness. She described what she had seen in the house over the preceding months: the disoriented states, the marked arms, the vials, the medical equipment, the blood on the floors. She described the last day she saw Sarah alive. She described hugging her daughter goodbye at the cemetery. Ryan sat through all of it, composed, watching. The defense leaned into Sarah's mental health, her prior history, and the text message in which she had written that she had lost her will to live. They argued the jury could not rule out that her death had been the result of her own choices. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On August 25, 2023, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: second-degree depraved heart murder, involuntary manslaughter, possession with intent to distribute, and 2 counts of drug distribution. 2 weeks of testimony, 284 exhibits, less than 3 hours to decide. Then came January 3, 2024, and the sentencing hearing. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Family members addressed the court directly. Tina Harris told Ryan she wanted him to hear her to understand, sitting there, what he had taken from her family. Rachel Harris called him a predator and a wolf in sheep's clothing. Tina Harris asked the court to keep him behind bars until his life was done. Ryan also spoke. He told the court that the words did not exist to convey the level of remorse he felt. He acknowledged the drugs had been his responsibility. He maintained he had not administered the final dose. Judge Cheryl McCallie spoke for nearly an hour before delivering the sentence. She described what the evidence had shown as the march to Sarah's death. She sentenced Ryan to 45 years in prison. Go back to the living room at Godwit Street. January 26, 2022. A first responder is standing beside James Ryan, asking him about the night before. The camera is recording, and Ryan is already talking, already answering questions before they have been fully asked, already shaping the frame through which everyone in that house will understand what they are looking at. He names the drug, he points at the history, he cries. The officers on scene accepted everything he said. The manner of death was recorded as undetermined. Ryan was not arrested. They seemed to accept his story that Sarah, struggling with mental health issues, had overdosed. That account bought him nearly 2 months. Then Rachel sat down with her sister's laptop on a weekend, worked out a password, and opened a year's worth of messages that made the account collapse from the inside. Ryan appealed his convictions. In October 2025, the Maryland Appellate Court upheld them, finding the evidence sufficient to support both the murder and manslaughter convictions, and ruling that the trial court had not erred in permitting expert testimony on power dynamics in intimate relationships. He is currently incarcerated at the Maryland Correctional Training Center in Washington County. He is eligible for parole consideration after 20 years. The recording from January 26th still exists. A man whose girlfriend has just died, composing himself, composing his account, composing the version of events that he needed the room to believe. The question that no verdict can fully answer is this: at what point does a man who keeps saying yes, knowing what those drugs do, watching what they are doing, become responsible for what happens when he finally says it one time too many? The jury answered in less than 3 hours.